Okay, so hello, my name's Stefan. I'm a mental health researcher at the Institute of Mental Health in Nottingham, and I'm here today to talk about a research study called NEON, which stands for Narrative Experiences Online. And NEON is funded by the NHS to look at how people's stories of recovery from mental health problems can help other people experiencing mental health problems. And we're very specifically looking at stories in recorded form. So video files, audio files, text, poetry, graphic novels, those kinds of things. And actually what's interesting nowadays is that there are thousands and thousands of recorded recovery stories available to people. I often suggest to people that they go onto YouTube, type in a search term such as psychosis recovery story, hit search, and start scrolling down, and you'll find that you never come to the end of the list of stories that comes up. And I tend to pick out psychosis as an example of a type of experience which I think is still not talked about very much in our society, where you might expect that there might be less stories available, but actually where there are thousands and thousands of stories available for people to engage with. And I think this is probably quite different to the situation 10 or 15 years ago, where some stories might be available in books, but maybe not so broadly. So NEON as a study has spent several years trying to understand what recovery stories are, how they can help people, to try and understand any situations where they might not help people or indeed might cause harm to people, and also to understand the work that people do when they build collections of recovery stories, such as collections presented in books or collections presented on, let's say, the NHS webpage. And what we've been working towards is the design of an online intervention which tries to match stories to people in a way which gives the best chance of finding a story that might help them. We've called this the NEON intervention. It's now available to people who sign up as participants for 3 clinical trials, and I think we'd estimate that probably anywhere up to about 30% of the population would be eligible for one of these trials. So if you're interested in taking a look, there's a good chance that you would be eligible, and you can sign up at recoverystories.uk. The NEON intervention draws on a collection of recovery stories, and I guess one question is, given so many thousands are available, why create a separate collection? Well, the reason is that every story in this collection has been examined by a member of the NEON study research team. The characteristics of the story have been entered into a database, and we're deliberately looking for characteristics that we believe matter in terms of whether that story has a positive impact on someone. So some of the characteristics that we're collecting are the characteristics of the person telling the story, because maybe if you find someone a bit like you, the story might be more likely to have an influence on you. Their characteristics of the story itself, so the events that take place in it. And they also include characteristics such as any content in the story that you might find distressing, because we know that there are some types of mental health content that particular people might want to avoid, such as, for example, recovery stories where someone talks about self-harm, where someone with experience of self-harm may want some control over whether they're exposed to someone else's story or not. So the NEON intervention draws on this collection. It's an online interface. you can use it through a web browser, and pretty much the only browser we don't support is Internet Explorer, because that's now a bit too old to work reliably. But you can access it through a web browser, and you can sign up using our trial website, recoverystories.uk. And if you do decide to take part in the trial, you answer a few simple questions about yourself, and then you're randomized into one of two conditions. Either you get access to the intervention straight away, or you get access after a year. So every single person in the trial will get access for a substantial amount of time, but for people in the control group, the access is delayed by a year, and this lets us look at whether the intervention actually makes a difference to people who receive it during that first year. And unlike a medical trial where you may take part, you may never know whether you've received a drug or not, and if you've been in the control group, you may never get access to that drug. At least we've made sure that everyone who takes part in the trial does get access to the neon intervention. So let's say you're in the intervention group, you get immediate access. What happens? Well, the first thing that happens is you get asked for a bit of information about yourself, and you can tell the system as much or as little as you want, including absolutely nothing. And then one of the types of information you can tell the system about is any types of content you really want to avoid, and those will always be respected. That information is used by the system as part of the process of matching you to a story. So once you've provided some initial information, then you're taken to an interface where you're given access to a story. This slightly varies. The story that you're given will vary depending on the information you've provided, but the story has been selected, will have been selected to have a good chance of providing some benefits to you. And the reason for showing the person just one story is that, while some users of the system may have read or watched many recovery stories, of course they may not. And this might in fact be the first online recovery story that anyone has ever read. And it could be very emotionally impactful for some people. So we wanted to give the simplest possible route into the system, and that was just to show one carefully selected story to allow someone to acclimatise to the idea of looking at stories online. And then after you've viewed that story, you can give some feedback on it through some simple questions at the bottom of the page. You can tell the system how hopeful the story made you feel. You can tell the system how connected to the narrator or to the story you felt. And you can tell the system how much you learnt from the story and how much empathy you felt for the person telling the story. And these questions have been selected because we believe they're an important part of how stories make an impact on people. And all of that information goes into the database, and it influences stories that you'll see in the future. But again, if you don't want to, you can entirely ignore that information as well. And then once you've either provided feedback or chosen not to, you get onto the main screen of the intervention, which gives 5 different routes for finding stories. And people in the trials can use this as much or as little as you want. And we know from trying this out with a group of 30 test users that a small number of people used it just 1 or 2 times, and a small number of people used it 40 or 50 times, and then most other people were somewhere in between. So the 5 different ways you can get to stories are, you can ask an algorithm to recommend a story to you, so to match a story to you. And this algorithm is experimental. It draws on the theory that we've developed in the story so far. It combines an element of machine learning with an element of matching someone to a story based upon the story's characteristics and their characteristics. So that's one route, and we're interested in seeing just how well the algorithm works. The next option is to pick a random story. So of course, no approach that we can take will do a perfect job of matching a story to a person. And maybe that random story that you select might just be the one that might have a big influence on you. The third option is to browse stories based upon categories that we've picked. And of course, this draws on the database of characteristics that we've created. You can browse stories based on about 20 characteristics, and these are the characteristics of the narrator of the story or of the content of the story. And for each characteristic, you can see how many stories we've got. So, for example, we might have 180 stories with female narrators and 140 with male narrators. We might have 7 stories that talk about experiences of eating disorders. And you can pick and choose any combination of categories to get you there. The final 2 options are lumped together. So let's say you've looked at 30 stories and 4 of them you've provided feedback through the simple questions to say that they made you feel particularly hopeful. Well, you can revisit them. And it will be interesting to see how much people use this feature. I guess we're interested in seeing whether there are a small number of stories that people regularly return to, or whether people are always looking for new material to read or watch. And like most online systems, in the 5th route, well, you can bookmark a story when you see it, and you can also block a story if you found it distressing or if you didn't want to see it again. So if you've bookmarked some stories, you can return to all the stories that you've bookmarked in the past. And that's the 5th way of accessing it. And in a way, that's it. It's a very simple intervention. I think its power is the large collection of stories that it's based on, the theory that the Neon study has developed over time, and hopefully the sensitive way in which all of this has been put together to create an online experience that we hope will help people. So do please sign up to one of our trials and try it out if you want. And if we find that the intervention is effective in that it improves quality of life for our trial participants, then we're actively planning on the study to try and make it available for the long term for free for everyone in the country, and maybe even broader than that. And of course, if you want to, we'd love to accept donations of stories. So we now have a simple form available that you can use if you would like to offer us your own recovery story. It might be one that you've created already, in which case you can either send the media to us or tell us where we can find it. Or you may find that you want to create a story specifically for the intervention, in which case we'd love to receive it. And the reason we believe this is an important option is that a strong finding from our first 2 years of research was that one impact of hearing someone else's recovery story often could be an increased desire to share your own story, because many people go through deeply distressing situations and experience forms of recovery that they want to share with other people, and we'd love to enable that. And in fact, my own story is in the collection. It's a written story. I've chosen to include it in an anonymous form, but if you choose to donate your story, it's entirely up to you, whether you're identifiable in it or anonymous. And we'd love to see the Neon collection grow and grow as people use the intervention, find they like it, and if they want to, choose to offer their story to us. So if you'd like to find out any more about the study, you can either go to recoverystories.uk or research into recovery/neon. And if you have any comments or questions about the study, please feel free to email us at neon@nottingham.ac.uk. Thank you.